Council Resolution 99, 2022, a resolution adopting the housing unit allocation chart for fiscal year 2023 pursuant to the Adequate Public Facilities Act of Howard County.
I move to approve Council Resolution 99, 2022.
Second.
It has been properly moved and seconded. Any discussion? Ms. Harriet, could you please call the vote?
Chair Jones?
Yes.
Ms. Young?
Yes.
Ms. Rigby?
Yes.
Ms. Walsh?
Yes.
Mr. Youngman?
Yes.
The motion to approve Council Resolution 99 passes.
Council Resolution 100, 2022, a resolution adopting the school capacity chart pursuant to the Adequate Public Facilities Act of Howard County to designate the elementary school regions and the elementary schools, middle schools, and high school constraint for new residential development during each of the following 10 years as based on the definition of the program capacity as defined by the Howard County Public School System policy.
I move to approve Council Resolution 100, 2022.
Second.
It has been properly moved and seconded. Any discussion? Ms. Harriet, could you please call the vote?
Chair Jones?
Yeah, I'm sorry. You had discussion?
Well, I know we were wondering what consequences there would be if we did not pass this tonight on the, I guess, overall, what would occur if people wouldn't be able to go through the development process? Would we rely on the old school capacity chart? What do we need to know if it does not?
The previous chart does stay in place.
Mr. Cook, is there anything else that we need to know?
The code provides that when the council approves a housing allocation chart, it must also approve a corresponding open and closed chart. That's what the code says. So having passed the housing allocation chart, not adopting the open and closed chart essentially would be out of compliance with what the code requires the council to do. If the pending chart is not approved, then the only chart that would be in place is the one that currently is on the books, which was the chart that was approved last time.
And if it were tabled tonight, is the consequences would be the same? That the chart that's previously approved would be?
Right. There would not be a gap because there's currently a open and closed chart in place.
Okay, so there's no gap.
There would not be.
All right.
Go ahead, Ms. Herman.
So the folks that were going to take a test in July would just be tested against the old chart? I think that's what you said. I just want to make sure.
Right. If a plan was going to be tested now, tomorrow, for example, and the chart is either tabled or not passed tonight, the Department of Planning and Zoning would have to use something, so would use the current chart.
Because one of my concerns was, that the baseline information isn't necessarily current, which is not good. But if everybody's going to go through their July test with information that's even 1 year less current than the already 1 year, that's 2 years old versus the 1 year old, then is that any better? And by the time we got to the end of, aren't most of these tests taken in July? I think they are.
That's probably a question better for DPZ, but I mean, they're tested whenever DPZ is ready to apply the test in terms of the development process, whenever the plan's ready to be tested.
I'm sure there might be some kind of watching what was previously in open and closed and what isn't based on whatever this council enacts, and so that may affect who files the day before the new chart becomes effective in the latter. But I don't see any trends where a particular month has more or less than others. I would say that I think the benefit of keeping this table in place until we have that data that I think many of us are waiting on, which is school enrollment in September, redistricting decision, perhaps related to high school 13, that this keeps it live for this body, knowing that it's tabled and it's something that we have to come back to, versus approving a table that we know is flawed from the start and letting that perhaps stay in place for another year, which is not something that I would be interested in doing. I definitely would like to revisit this in fall or early winter, and I hope that we do that regardless of what the outcome is here today. But my preference, at least, would be to table this. So again, there's at least more of a reminder on us to come back to the issue and revisit it when we have that better data.
Ms. Rigby.
I mean, I think I'd say that if we want to start basing the open-close chart on September's enrollment numbers, then what we should do is really change the code to be directing the school system and DPZ to get the information that we want. If the issue is that the information that they're giving us, which is the information that's required by code, isn't what we want, then I think we need to go to the code and change what we're requesting. It was my understanding that we had kind of a general consensus around, after the school board goes through their redistricting process, to then approve a chart based on those most up-to-date, and very real immediate numbers. But I think it was my understanding, based on the work session discussion, that would be another discussion. So I think Mr. Youngman's point about, if we leave the old chart in place, that's very old data versus this old data, and then there seemed to be agreement from DPZ, if this was the directive of the council, that they would be open to that.
Mr. Youngman.
I don't think we can keep it tabled long enough for it to give us I love the fact that there's like a forced reason for us to come back and redo it after redistricting, but we might need to self-discipline on that, because I don't think we can keep it tabled for 6 months, can we? I mean, we can keep extending it over.
no expiration.
Oh, it's a resolution, I'm sorry. My bad. I guess I'm different. I don't necessarily want to keep 2 years old chart or data-based chart in place for another 6 months, just because we don't trust ourselves to not come back here in December and handle it. But yet, time has shown that we don't. So, having that is not a terrible idea either. So, okay.
Ms. Rigby and then Ms. Young.
I would just say, Mr. Youngman, that, we talked about in the work session, there was general agreement. We have HCPSS, who is, I think ultimately what we all really want is just to be operating off of correct, up-to-date, timely data. And so that's the part where to me, it says, I think the path forward is to approve the most up-to-date data as required by the code, which is what we have before us. And then go in the fall, after, they complete that. And then I think that it's incumbent on all of us. And I don't think that we're just going to forget to do that, because it involves two other bodies. It involves the executive branch, and it involves HCPSS. So I guess I don't see it quite the same as some other thorny issues.
And we might be able to also look at the code change at that point to, going forward, require that we have, a column on that chart that's like, and even if it's mid-year data or something, but, if we're looking at something in June of 2020, that the baseline isn't from
Right.
a year earlier, so we can instruct them to provide that.
Yes, we'll have time to decide what it is that we want them to send us, because what is currently in the code is insufficient to us all, I think.
Ms. Young.
Well, I don't know, just doesn't seem to make common sense that we would adopt a chart that, I think one of the things that we also all agree on is that the information that we have in here is maybe not sufficient, not up to date, not correct, and that we could potentially get that information in another 3 or 4 months. So I personally think it would be a better idea to table this, come back to it. It will be still sitting in our books, so we will know that it is tabled. And at that time, we could also adopt an amendment saying that from now on, we would ask for the school capacity chart in January.
Ms. Rigby?
I mean, I think then we're letting older, how old is the data at this point for the chart that's currently in place? I mean, that's my concern. We're saying we don't want to approve one chart because we don't feel it meets, it's out of date, it's insufficient, but then we're going to instead rely on an older chart that is even more out of date. You know, and then furthermore, we're out of compliance with the code. So why would we willingly, I mean, we say all the time, right? We need to follow the code, follow the code. Exactly. So let's do it. I don't know. I like rules and codes, but that's me.
Oh, and just to go back to your earlier question, Mr. Cook, you were asked what happens if it wasn't passed, and we started talking about if it's tabled, but what if, so we passed CR 99, the housing unit allocation chart. Now we're on CR 100. If this is tabled, the bodies that deal with all the other stuff and their specialty, they still go forward, or does our tabling pause everything? Because if we table this till September or October or even to January, does that pause what other bodies will do with the numbers, the older numbers?
I don't think inaction on the open close chart is likely to influence what planning and zoning would do in terms of applying the schools test. You know, and as far as what the school system does, I mean, I really can't speak to what either one would do, but I mean, that's sort of my best guess.
Yeah, okay. And Mr. Youngman and then Ms. Walsh.
Is there a third option, which is table it for 3 weeks, try to get, I mean, I think we all got, they're not like certified, but we all got those June numbers, didn't we? That I think came in through Mr. Glendenning's office last week. They weren't in the open closed chart. And, you know, there was no like, it didn't show a roll forward of here's where we are and here's what the projections are, but we got them. Would 3 weeks be enough for us to get that done? Now that I've said all that, I think a lot of people will take their test in July and they'll take it off the old chart. So to just, even delaying it 3 weeks is going to allow a bunch of tests to be taken off of the old chart. So, okay, never mind.
Ms. Walsh.
One other point, and you brought this up in work session, Mr. Youngman, was this notion of predictability and reliability, that you had concerns that we would file legislation and then consider and pass a second open-closed school chart in a single calendar year. But putting it on the table then alerts the business community, the development community, that this thing still is in play. So they have the predictability of the old chart while our reconsideration is pending, and know that the change is forthcoming in fall, early winter.
Ms. Rigby.
We have to take a break in November. It's going to be challenging to do legislation in December because of the way that this schedule is. I've heard that the reasoning is we don't want to be using old data, but then we're instead going to rely on this older chart. I'm just trying to understand the why. Ms. Young or Ms. Walsh, can you explain the why?
Sure, and I was hoping that we would talk about it more and ask that we would in the forthcoming quarterly meeting with us and the Board of Education, where we're going to continue this conversation. I understand that that date may be in jeopardy due to attendance issues. But from my preparation for both the work session, our consideration of this pending bill and that meeting, is that there are two inputs that the school system uses to put forth this kind of open and closed school chart and its projections. And one is based on capital projections, and one is based on actual, on school enrollments and yields. And so if you go off capital, and this was the point I tried to make in work session, and I've tried to make it for, let's say, 3.5 years now, is that capital program changes. It's changed since we approved a capital program in the 23 budget. But
You mean the one that the Board of Ed sets as their priorities and when they want to phase these different projects in?
Right.
That's the capital?
Because
Okay.
Because what happens is, and we saw this with Dorsey Overlook, depending on where a child is, or depending on where a given house is scheduled to attend, the projected yield changes. So for example, in Dorsey Overlook, we saw that the same townhome at the corner of Columbia and Route 108 would send X number of children to Wild Lake Middle School and Y children to Dunlogan. And this is the rationale of our school system. So if you're folding new schools or, school projections that, again, seem to change on a pretty usual basis, they have changed since we approved our last budget, then that is probably not the best data. And so there are those of us, and I think I'm included in them, that say, use actual enrollment, use the closest data we can to how many kids are sitting in those buildings right now. And the best that we can do for that is the certified enrollment, September 30th, that somehow gets around to being certified by the state several months later. I agree, and that the comment was made in work session, we do not have to wait for the state to say, yes, good job counting your students, Howard County. I think we can handle that. But what we've seen historically, aside from COVID, and I don't know what Mr. Rogers was talking about, lower birth rate, because I don't think that applies to Howard County. But what we see in Howard County predictably before COVID was a significant increase in annual enrollment year by year. So we're losing count of somewhere rounding up, but not too much, to 1,000 kids a year over 10 or more years. So the theory was always, let's get closer to using how many actual kids are in there when we're generating these open-closed school charts versus always being a year behind in that annual count. So
why aren't we making that code change?
right now, the code says we can do it whenever we want.
Right, but the code also has it on capital projections and previous school enrollment, and then the timing is June, July. So I guess you're just saying to reorient the timing on a longer time period, so you're saying that the time requirement is not in the code?
Right.
We're just out of
This
habit
specific, yes.
in the June, July timeframe.
Right.
And you would like to start shifting to a more habitual sort of September, October timeframe.
That is correct. That is my personal opinion is we should be shifting it that way. And the only explanation we've got, because we've asked, and I think Mr. Rogers confirmed this, or maybe Mr. Bronout from Department of Planning and Zoning in that work session, was it's probably the way that we've always done it, right? We've always done it this way in June, July, because that's when that feasibility study comes out. But there's no reason it couldn't be there, and that's what we heard. If that is the council's wish, then this unspecified date by which the council has to approve these charts annually could just as easily be in fall, early winter as it is now, June, July. Layer then on top of it the fact that we know we're probably going to be doing it because of high school 13 redistricting. It just seems to me that this is the time on the bigger picture issue and on the specific one of this high school redistricting that we start using the right data for this input because it's so consequential.
Go ahead,
So,
Ms.
well, we all want the right data, and I'm not opposed at all to using the school enrollment numbers. I think that I get stuck on this issue of, so if the council's in agreement, which it's kind of frustrating that conversation is happening here and now, right, as the vote's happening. But if we're more in agreement that we'd rather use school enrollment numbers and we want to do this in the September, October timeframe, that's something that I would be supportive of. I just don't understand why we're doing it. Instead of directing the code to direct us in the way that we want, we're just sort of doing it to do it. And I think that's just procedurally a frustrating thing for me.
Okay, this has been a great discussion. Are there any closing thoughts before we vote?
I'll offer a closing thought before we vote. I think regardless of what we do, a lot of projects are going to take their test in the next few weeks in July. And while it's an imperfect situation to have them using the chart that we would be approving tonight, it's a less perfect situation to have them using a chart that's now even older. If I'm back next year, I'm game to do another chart after redistricting and to change the code. So regardless of what time of year that we do this every year going forward, that we have this, we tell the school system what to give us. Because clearly it's not what any of us want. So that's my closing thought.
Any other council members? All right, Ms. Harris, could you please call the vote?
Chair Jones?
So I think pre-registration numbers, while they're hardly ever, 100% accurate, they're as close as what we have to be able to plan when it comes to all kinds of things. That's K-12, that's collegiate, that's military, anything that you pre-register for. There's going to be some wiggle room, some plus or minus points there, but that's the best that we got. To take numbers from a year or two earlier definitely won't help, but I do agree with the consensus of the body that something needs to be done in the near future. So I'm going to vote yes tonight to approve this and look forward to discussion on shifting time frames or whatever we got to do to make it as close to the real number as possible. So my vote is yes.
Ms. Young?
I think that we should be tabling this piece of legislation so that we can move on something that makes more sense at a later time. So I'm going to abstain.
Ms. Rigby?
Yes.
Ms. Walsh?
This is maybe the only control that this council has on the pace of development in individual communities and the number of kids that crowd our high schools, particularly. This is the only control that I'm aware of. Twice this council has declined to extend a waiting period, and we've heard again and again the current waiting period is extensive, coextensive with the time it usually takes most projects to get through the planning process. If you time it right, you don't even wait that time because it's a calendar year count, not an actual day. We all know that this process is flawed. We've had all kinds of meetings with all kinds of stakeholders, public and otherwise, to resolve this issue. And 4 years in to our first terms, we've done nothing to correct it. My vote is no.
Mr. Youngman?
I agree with actually everything Ms. Walsh said, that we seem to keep having the same conversation and we haven't done anything to fix it. So it would be great if we could all commit that if we're back here, that we're going to fix it. But I do think that there are schools that are potentially open in that 2-year-old chart that are closed in this one. And I don't want people taking their test on the old chart. So I vote yes.
The motion to approve Council Resolution 100, 2022 passes.